Okay, great. Calling to order the Town Finance Community Housing Oversight Committee meeting on Monday, December 9th at 8 a.m. First order of business is the minutes.
We have to do a roll call. Do we have to do attendance by roll call? Point of order.
You can, just to make sure everyone can hear you.
Okay. All right, let's do attendance. I can see you all, but anyway, Peter.
Present.
Rhonda.
Present.
Erwin.
Present.
And Rick.
Present.
Oh, and John, we're just doing attendance.
Morning.
Good morning, and the chair is present, so we have a quorum. And just wanting to know if anybody would like to make a public comment. Is anyone online or wanting to make a public comment? Oh, you know what? I see Denise is in the attendees, not in the panelists. Could we promote Denise?
Yep, I'll move her over. And there's no hands for comment.
Okay. All right. So first on our agenda is to approve the minutes from the November 4th meeting. So I'd welcome a motion.
So moved.
Hi, Denise. How do we?
Second.
Okay, so we'll do the roll call vote. Denise, we're just voting on approving the minutes from the November 4th meeting. Peter?
Aye.
Rhonda?
Aye.
Erwin?
I'll say aye. I wasn't present. I forget if I'm able to approve the minutes or not.
You can.
Okay,
That is permitted. Rick?
I wasn't here either, so I'll do present unless it's needed.
Okay, John?
I'm in the same category.
And Denise?
Same category, present.
Okay. Are we okay, Katie, on the minutes? Oh, the chair votes aye. So we have 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. This hasn't come up to me before, but I think we're okay to approve.
Okay, I guess we can always do it again next time if there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
Kathy, before you approve, may I just ask a question? Did you have a quorum?
We have a quorum for today.
Did you have a quorum for the minutes you're trying to approve?
We
Yes.
had a
That meeting?
We had a quorum at that meeting. I'm not sure that we have a quorum right now to approve these meetings. These minutes, we'll have to look into it.
Okay.
And if we don't, we'll vote it again next time. Okay, so before we, or just to launch our discussion of the Community Preservation Committee grant application process, which is the next item on the agenda, I want to sort of remind the committee of the discussion that we had at our formation and of our own role and how that fits with the CPC, as well as sort of the process that we had last year. So this is our second go round of existing as a committee while CPC is going through its approval process. Hi, Avery. So we had a discussion about how we fit with CPC and not wanting to step on their toes or do the work that is their purview and to stay in our lane. And I think what we arrived at is that CPC has the sole authority to approve CPA funds, but that at that moment when the funds are approved, we, TCHOC, will take over oversight of those funds. And what we did last year to support the CPC process, and I'm going to turn it over to Katie to remind us of the details of this, was two things. One was we submitted questions to them to help them in their due diligence process as they look at the projects. And then the second thing was that we produced a report that went not only to CPC, but all of our nominating committees, finance committees, select board, et cetera, PVBC, to review the work that we've done. So we had, Peter and I had a chairs meeting with the CPC, with Maureen Callahan and David Hare last week. And they were happy to have that same sort of support this year of both getting due diligence questions and also getting a review of our work in a timely fashion. So I'm going to just turn it over to Katie for more specifics on that.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so I think our,
I can't hear you,
suggestions-
Katie.
Can you hear me now? Yes, people can hear me. Okay, maybe it's just Kathy.
Oh, now I can hear you.
Okay. So to the chair's point, our recommendation to the committee is to see if we can do the same steps in this grant cycle for Community Preservation Committee. So I just want to talk through briefly the two housing related applications that are before CPC, and then walk through what we're suggesting for a timeline for the TCHOC's kind of next steps. So in your packet are the applications that have went to the CPC. We only included the housing related ones, but the two applications are the Charles River Center are redeveloping East Militia Heights. They have a request in to CPC for $3.5 million to help with that proposed housing development. And then the Housing Authority has an application in for improvements at Seabeds Way and Captain Robert Cook for $5.6 million, also submitted this cycle to the CPC. Also in your packet with these applications are the due diligence questions that the Community Preservation Committee has already sent to the applicants. So the first suggestion to this committee is if you can think of in the next few days additional questions that you think would aid the Community Preservation Committee in their vetting of these applications. I'm going to suggest that we collect them over email if folks are interested in sending me your questions that you would like to recommend. The due diligence process is underway, so the chairs asked if we could get them any questions by the end of this week, the 13th. So if committee members if you all want to send me any of your questions by Thursday, the 12th, then I can compile them all and send them along to the CPC. So let me pause there and see if there's questions on the due diligence component.
So just to answer kind of the why question about why we're only giving the committee, 4 days to review these applications and come up with due diligence questions. It's just got, can we address that, Katie? Because in the timeline that CPC is under, I think that they had expected answers to their due diligence questions by, I think the end of the month.
January 1. Yeah.
January 1, right. And so, I think the goal is usually to have answers to due diligence questions in front of them before the applicant comes before them to make a presentation. So I think that we would just, any questions and insight that we may offer would probably have its, highest use or best use if we got it to them, sooner. It's basically it.
Thank you. So the second suggestion that Kathy mentioned was last year, this committee had put together kind of an overview letter to the appointing authorities for each of this committee's membership, saying kind of what TCHOC had done in the year prior, what we had learned about oversight of the previously appropriated funds. So we're recommending that the group do this again. In terms of timeline, we talked with the CPC chairs about getting them this letter before the Community Preservation Committee has their consultations with the Select Board and the Finance Committee. So then all of those stakeholders have the perspective of this committee as they're going through that process. I think last year, our letter came out maybe after those consultations, but before town meeting. So we're moving it up in the process. I think it might be a better timing and In doing that, our recommendation is the January 13th and February 10th, we had holds for monthly TCHOC meetings. And if we do want to do this letter on that time frame, we would meet on January 13th as a group and kind of really have a robust discussion about what we would like to see in that letter, and then with the goal to finalize it as a committee at your February 10th meeting. Any thoughts or questions on that? Great. That's all
Yeah,
I
and I
have,
get,
Madam Chair.
yeah, no, I guess I would just say, so if everybody, two things, if everybody could hold, and I know Katie, you'll put this out on a calendar invite, but if you could plan on attending the January and February meetings, if at all possible. And second, I think, we'll have maybe that much more value to add this year since we've now been in existence for a year, and, can at least share, the experience that we've had to date, to help the various committees as they are considering these proposals. Katie, do we need to vote on this, or is this?
No, I don't think so. I just, as long as there's a sense from the group that this is a good path to be on, and
So I have
otherwise.
a question about, just in terms of framing our discussion for January. Is there any utility in you, Katie, either kind of circulating last year's letter or just circulating a proposed outline of at least the subject matter and the approach that we're going to take in the letter itself? Just that would benefit us in terms of framing the discussion. But if you think it's a clean slate this year, that's fine with me too. I know my instincts would be to go back and read the old letter. So the prior year's letter.
Yeah, good suggestion. It is in your packet for today, but I can send it out as a standalone. And just
Sorry.
high level, no, sorry. Just from a high level, last year's letter basically summarized, the meetings that we had, what the balances were on all of the CPA grants that this committee has oversight over. And then we had recommendations about if CPC were to approve, at that point, it was the 5.5 million for Linden construction. Items that this committee would recommend were included in the grant agreement for those funds. So I certainly can start an outline of the letter for January, but I think the discussion from the committee, I think the main questions are there any insights that this group has gleaned from the funds already distributed to the Housing Authority that you think the appointing boards would want to hear about, work that's been done, timeline, progress on the projects, and any kind of outstanding questions or concerns or none that this committee has about those funds.
So Kathy, I just have a
Denise.
question. Yeah. What was the thought process in giving us any application for housing versus just the application for the Needham Housing Authority?
Well, I think if either of those, anything that is approved ultimately will be under our purview. And so I think there's that reason. And then the second reason is that the committee has some experience that may be useful in terms of adding due diligence questions,
Okay, so this was a discussion that we had once had and didn't envision this. So your belief is that if the Charles River Center goes forward with CPA money and additional whatever money there's going to be, that they will then come under the TCHOC as well?
Yes, because that would be, if it is CPA money, it is town money that's being spent
Okay.
on housing. So it could be any project, there could be, well, in the future, who knows what it might be, but certainly anything that has town money in it that's housing would come under this committee, if approved, right? And I just want to reiterate that it is not for us to recommend one project over another to CPC. that is solely in their purview. We're simply offering up possible due diligence questions and sharing our experience, which I think, frankly, whether or not there are applications in front of CPC, we would want to have an annual letter to Select Board, to FinCom, to PBBC about our work. So I don't think that actually changes due to applications in front of the CPC. But thank you for clarifying that, Denise. Other discussions
I just
or
want to say,
questions?
if the letter is in the, I'm sorry, I didn't see it in the packet. It was my, but if the letter, last year's letter is in the packet, you don't need to send it out again.
We're good.
Okay. All right. Well, if it's the sense of the committee that we go forward in that way, as Katie said, if you take a look at the questions that CPC already has for these two projects, if you had any other due diligence questions that you would recommend that they add, you can get them to Katie by the end of this week, right? By this Friday, Katie. And
Sorry, if you could do Thursday, that would just give me time to
Thursday.
put them together.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah. Perfect. No, thank you for Thursday. And apologize for the quick turnaround, but by Thursday, and then we'll move forward with the letter in our January and February time slots. We'll get that approved and done. So if we're good on that front, we have an update on the Needham Housing Authority projects by the Needham Housing Authority. So if we can
folks over.
move them over, and I also will remind the committee that we have a hard stop at 9. So we have a lot to cover, but hard stop at 9.
So this is Reg Foster, and with me today are consultants from Cambridge Housing Authority and our new development partners for the Linden Street redevelopment project. We're going to try to skate through these presentations that we sent on pretty quickly, so we leave time for questions. And Katie, if you could enforce the time meter here so we don't run out of time, I'd appreciate it for the second presentation. It makes sense to start with Seabeds and Cook, as you will see in a couple minutes. We have Matt Zajac here of the Cambridge Housing Authority, who's been one of the leaders of the project since day one. And Matt, let me turn it over to you. And I think you need screen share, or Katie, are you going to be doing the honors here?
Matt, I think you should be able to share. And Rich, is there Chris Moyer? Would you like me to bring him over, or anyone else from your team? Yes.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us. As Reg said, my name is Matt Zajac. I'm the Deputy Director of Planning at the Cambridge Housing Authority. Cambridge Housing Authority has been supporting the Needham Housing Authority as their development consultant over the last several years. I'm just going to bring up our slides to offer a presentation that updates the group on the Seabeds and Cook project. All right, so we wanted to start with a recap of the goals of the Seabeds and Cook project from 10,000 feet. The project is aimed at shifting the Seabeds and Cook properties, which are currently federal public housing, to the Section 8 program. And the reason to reposition how the property receives funding from the federal government is inspired by 2 points. Generally, it provides a more consistent stream of funding for the Needham Housing Authority. And second, it provides a higher stream of funding for the Needham Housing Authority that can be used both to finance renovations at the property and to support its other work in the community. The repositioning effort, switching from public housing to Section 8, also opens up what we call fair cost authority. Fair cost authority, you may recall, is the ability for Needham Housing Authority to create new project-based vouchers. In the context of your community, the goal is to employ those vouchers at the Linden Street development. So the Seabeds and Cook projects are therefore tied together in that the Seabeds and Cook project, generating fair cost authority, creates the operating income and vouchers that helps the Linden Street project to succeed. A few points that we wanted to put at the top of your minds as we go through the rest of the presentations today. So first, Fair Cloth Authority only becomes available when Seabeds and Cook starts construction. This is a HUD rule in that they want the property to be released from its declaration of trust before those new vouchers become available. Second, the Fair Cloth Authority needs to be available to Linden Street in order for that property to start construction. This is based on generally the requirements of lenders and other funders. They want to see that all of the capital and operating sources for a project are in place before they put their money on the line. Finally, Needham Housing Authority is committed to finding a way to move both these projects forward on the most expedited timeline and in a way that doesn't have them compete with each other for state resources, particularly tax-exempt bonds. When we last provided an update on the financing plan for Seabeds and Cook to this committee, it was in the middle of 2024, and we shared that Needham Housing Authority was planning to pursue something called a Section 22 streamlined voluntary conversion. This was a program that would have closed out all of Needham's federal public housing. It had a number of benefits to the Housing Authority's repositioning strategy. Generally, it generated the maximum amount of income possible through a conversion by getting what we call tenant protection vouchers for all of the units that were switching from between the programs. It also generated the most Fair Cloth Authority, providing one-to-one conversion. The streamlined voluntary conversion approach also benefited from speed and cost. So under a RAD conversion, you need to show that the property is able to meet 20 years of capital needs. The streamlined voluntary conversion program didn't have that requirement. So you were able to proceed with what we were thinking of as like a skinny rehab scope. And also that construction scope didn't have to start in order for Needham Housing Authority to access the Fair Cloth Authority. That was really beneficial to the Linden Chambers or Linden Street project because it allowed it to move forward as soon as the conversion took place and not have to wait for a construction project at Seabeds and Cook to start. Unfortunately, during the summer and particularly in September, Needham Housing Authority and Cambridge Housing Authority got word from HUD about a shift in policy. Due to a lawsuit, the HUD has decided to close down that program. Without getting into the details, the lawsuit was generally about the requirement for HUD to have a cost test associated with the Section 22 streamlined voluntary conversion. We had a meeting with senior staff at HUD, and they encouraged us to shift back to the RAD Section 18 program, letting us know that they would expedite the application if we did so, and that action was taken. So what are the implications of this shift in the financing plan? So the first is that the Seabeds and Cook project generates less income. So you're not able to access 100% of those more lucrative tenant protection vouchers. In fact, you can only currently access 80%, possible that there will be a 90% tier introduced in 2025. The implication of this, in turn, is that the property is no longer generating enough income in order to provide a loan to the Linden Street project. Some of you might remember that the Linden Street project at certain points had a loan from Seabeds and Cook as one of its capital sources. Second, the number of Fair Cloth units that are available is reduced. Those Fair Cloth units are still there and able to support the Linden Street property, but they become available on a slower timeline. As we talked about previously, Seabeds and Cook now needs to start construction in order to access those Fair Cloth units. And the construction project that it needs to do is larger because it needs to meet 20 years of capital needs. This in turn impacts the capital stack that we need to produce because it needs to be larger. The property is able to tap into sources focused on sustainability and green resources, but we also anticipate and have made the larger request for CPA than was originally anticipated during the early part of 2024. The scope at Seabeds and Cook is really committed to two prongs. The first is making sure that the property can meet that 20-year viability test that RAD requires. And it'll be doing that by repairing or replacing all the items that are fair or poor rated in a capital needs assessment. The secondary goal is to have the property meet climate, resiliency, and green standards. This is important both because it's a goal of the Needham Housing Authority in the town, and because it's a place where you can leverage funds from other sources if you're meeting higher standards these days. Without going into the scope in detail, I just wanted to highlight a few of the items that are CPA eligible: building envelope improvements, roofing and siding, and windows in order to ensure weather tightness, as well as replacement of dangerous systems and improvements to the life safety systems. CPA funds are anticipated to be an important part of the capital stack in order to make the Seabeds and Cook property or project work. And the CPA funds are important for, I think, 3 large reasons. So the first is that there are unfortunately fewer resources available at the state level in order to fund preservation and rehabilitation projects. There are increasingly programs that do provide support for sustainability upgrades and green upgrades, and we'll try and use those to the maximum extent. But the qualified allocation plan for low-income housing tax credits and associated programs put a big emphasis on new production for good reason as we move through the state's housing crisis. In this context, the CPA funds are important both because they help fill that gap and they hopefully will prevent the property from having to seek tax-exempt bonds and LIHTC funding. So as you may recall from other presentations, there's a tremendous queue for the bonds and tax credits that many affordable housing projects rely on. And I think just one anecdotal piece of information about that is that it's CHA's understanding that no state public housing redevelopment projects will receive tax-exempt financing or bond allocations in 2025. So the fact that there's already a year ahead and we know that none of that subset of projects are going to be able to get an allocation is important for why we're trying to stay out of that program so that the Seabeds and Cook property can move forward faster. Here we see the current budget for the project. The construction costs are based on the 50% schematic design estimate. I do want to highlight that we are waiting on a 100% schematic design cost estimate, as well as the capital needs assessment to be finalized. And there is the potential that those construction costs will shift as we move forward. We're currently using the lower end of the estimate because Needham Housing Authority is committed to trying to do this project in the most cost-effective manner possible. Also want to just call out the DOER decarbonization source and the lean DER source. Those are the green sustainable funding sources that we're trying to really shake the tree to find as much outside money as possible. And to wrap us up, here's where the timeline currently stands. We're hoping to be able to refine and confirm the scope of the project at the end of this year. That would lead us to following through with HUD due diligence in Q1 and finishing up the plans and specs during Q2 and Q3. The goal is to be in a position to start construction in 2026. Of course, as we talked about, the ability to start on that timeline really depends on the ability of the project to assemble the capital stack. Thanks everybody for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions that the committee has.
Thank you, Matt. Do we want to do a quick, oh, okay, I see some questions. Rhonda.
Thank you for that. That was very clear. Where does the $20 million come from? And do we have anything that shows, does the cash flow service the loan?
In terms of the permanent loan, the permanent loan is based on the projected income from the mix of TPV and RAD and projection of operating expenses based on current NHA operations. We will absolutely be able to provide you with sort of that breakdown of the basis for the assumptions of that as part of the due diligence.
So who is that, a bank loan? Where does the money, where?
Yeah, we're assuming a bank loan right now. The one thing that's sort of unusual about our loan right now is that we're hoping to be able to leverage some of the favorable green financing that's being incentivized by the Inflation Reduction Act. So that program rolled out large sources of money to national nonprofits to then offer favorable financing to projects that have green features. And those programs haven't quite been finalized yet. So our assumptions there are using some of what we've heard from webinars and conferences, but generally it's assumed to be a private loan from those programs that are being seeded by the IRA.
Thank you.
Erwin?
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Matt. I don't know that you could answer this question. I was just curious, with a change of administration coming in January, is there anything that could happen at HUD that would derail or impact what is being planned going forward?
It's a great question. I think that it is unknowable exactly what the HUD administration will do. Our experience at CHA during the last Trump administration was that HUD repositioning programs and HUD in general wasn't a focus area for the administration in terms of policy change. So our hope is sort of that carries through and that these existing programs are allowed to continue to move through the pipeline. Generally, we found that administrations, when applications are in the pipeline or in processing, tend to respect that. So again, that was something why we tried to get in that RAD Section 18 application as soon as possible. And we did, so that we are in their queue. That hopefully increases the opportunity that they respect that this is something that private and public actors have already invested money in.
Thank you.
John?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Matt, my question's on the construction cost and the spread between 23 million and 28 million. It's a big spread. It's 5 million. And while I understand the goal and the intent to have it come in lower, a lot of our experience is that despite that intent, forces beyond our control make that cost higher. So if it is $28 million, where would that $5 million gap be funded from?
Great question. I think that first to talk about like where that $5 million might come from and why we're hopeful to get to the lower end. Part of it is about looking at site work in particular and things that can last that 20 years and trying to pare back to make sure we're only doing the scope that HUD requires. So that's our hope there on how to get to the bottom end. And then in terms of what happens if we are at the higher end of the spectrum, one, there'll be a continued reevaluation of those other sources that are out there to try and fill the gap. Two, Needham Housing Authority has started to kick the tires on whether they could phase this project, similar to the Linden Street project, where there's the 1A and 1B, and the ability to work on one of those at a time, provided the project allowed it to move forward. We might be able to do seabeds or cook in order to move the project forward and provide the resources necessary to move Linden. And then a final strategy or option would be to look at the more traditional bond financed and tax credit opportunity, which brings in the low income housing tax credit to help fill the gap. Again, we're trying to avoid that in order to keep the project pace going forward.
And when under this timeline would you expect to know what the construction cost is? When would you have, would you actually wait until bids in hand, or would you sort of have phasing decisions and things like that done beforehand?
Yeah, I think we would have a sense of where things currently stand in Q1 of next year and be able to make decisions based on that. The numbers would obviously be refined as we move into bidding, as we get closer, and then as the selected contractor then selects subcontractors. But the broad outline of where is the cost between the 23 and the 28 and how is the project going to move forward, we anticipate that decision is going to have to be made in the next couple of months.
Thank you.
Peter?
Oh, I just have a kind of related question, which is, so it sounds like that arriving at what the actual construction costs are going to be, or the reasonable estimate is it all subject to completing the capital needs assessment? Or is that one of the key gating items to complete the capital needs assessment?
Yeah, it's one of the two items. So the capital needs assessment, the piece of information that it really provides us is what is the capital needs assessors think are the items that need to be replaced within the 20 years. So they're sort of helping us define the scope that HUD thinks needs to happen. And then the cost of what that scope is drawn from the professional cost estimate that's produced by the architect and engineer. So in those two reports, sort of in combination, are what define the final scope and cost.
But you have to do the capital needs assessment first.
Yes, and we have a draft of that. We're just working through our questions and quality control on it.
Yeah, so that was my last other question, which was, I see 50% and that, but are we at the 50% mark for the capital needs assessment, or are we much further along than that?
We're much further along that. We have a complete draft, and we're just we're basically trying to work with them to find strategies to reduce the cost of the overall project.
And are you going to provide the capital needs assessment as part of the answers to the due diligence questions?
In terms of timeline, I would love to take that back as a question. There's certainly no objection in the long term to providing the capital needs assessment. I just want to make sure it's the complete and final document. I would certainly anticipate that all town committees would have that in advance of next meetings and votes.
I think what Matt is saying is it's not going to be ready by January 1st, probably, but it would be available during the January, February review period here.
That was kind of my question, just to get a sense of when it will be. And I have one final question, which is, are you going to wait until you complete that in order to put together a cash flow analysis? Or are you going to be, or do you have that available now? Because I think all we've seen is the construction analysis, right? But we haven't seen a cash flow analysis to address the viability of the project.
Yeah, we are working on the cash flow analysis. We have them for a number of different scenarios where the project moves together, where it's just seabed, just cooked. So we have that in the background and can put together that as part of one of the answers.
Thank you.
Other questions? If not, I have a question that kind of spans, I think, what you've just talked about with the next one, which is I'm interested to know what the contingency plan would be for Linden in case the seabeds cook is not going forward and does not release the fair cloth, et cetera. So maybe, I don't know, Reg, if that's something that you would address in your next presentation or.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue to introduce Mike Mattis, who's president of Affordable Housing Services Collaborative, and Betsy Collins, who is vice president of development at Peabody. And we put together a rich presentation that we're going to hopefully skate through, as well as get to your question, Kathy, and try to leave as much time as possible for questions. So let's take it from here, guys.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I think we had the opportunity to meet some of you back in September when we first got selected. How do I share the screen? I was going to do the same thing here and pull up my, let's see. Where's the sharing button? Do I need to be made a whole? Oh, here it is. Sorry, found it. Okay. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Not yet.
No. Okay. Again, sorry. All right. How about now? Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you. All right. So again, first 100 days on the job here. And so again, just a quick little background. We introduced ourselves a few months ago. I'm Mike Mattos, President, Executive Director of Affordable Housing Services Collaborative. My colleague Betsy Collins is on the meeting with us and will speak in a moment from Peabody Properties. We share a joint founder of both companies, and we have been collaborating for over 23 years together. And we're very fortunate to have been selected by the Housing Authority to help guide them through the process of getting Linden and Chambers developed. And it is a 50-50 partnership with the Housing Authority. And we look forward to continue to work with them. In the first 100 days, we have been productive. A lot of major milestones have been accomplished. One of them, and this is sort of just again chronological order here, but at the end of September, we had submitted a notice to HUD to get the anticipated RAD rents from them. Again, going back to connect what Matt was saying about their application for the Section 18 application on Seabed and Cooks, that would activate 68 Faircloth units for us. And so this is really HUD telling us what they believe the RAD rents would be to help us with our underwriting. So that request is in now and it's pending, and we should hear shortly. In October, we had two major milestones. The Housing Authority had previously, to us coming on board, had applied for a site readiness grant to Mass Development as well as a Housing Choice Grant, and they were fortunate enough to have both of those grants awarded to them. And so we'll be working with them to fulfill the obligations of those grant awards.
I just want to give a shout out to Chris Moyers, who actually labored long midnight hours to get that $1 million worth of grant over from the CHA side. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, well done. Thank you. And then likewise, we had two major milestones in November. We had the Planning Board approval and the Conservation Commission approval for the project. And when I say project, it's really for both Phase 1A and Phase 1B. But the focus of our financing plan, as you'll hear in a minute, is really focused on Phase 1A. And then at the end of November, we also submitted a pre-application to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, formerly DHCD, and basically, notify them of our intent to submit a full one-stop application at the end of February. That's under review right now. We feel like we have a very competitive application with high readiness to proceed. But as it's noted here on the slide, it is highly competitive. They are very oversubscribed in terms of the number of applications to number of resources available. So we really have to, I think we have put our best foot forward in illustrating to them. So we're ready to proceed. We are. Going back to the phasing of Linda's and Shannon's, this sort of illustrates that portion of it. As you can see, this is Phase 1A, where you would have in this area, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but in this area would be the area of Phase 1A. And so what we would be contemplating would be to relocate the folks that are living in this area once we get funded and start construction, prior to rather, to relocate those folks into opportunities that for vacancies within Phase 1B area and other vacancies within the portfolio for the Needham Housing Authority and within the community itself. We have a relocation consultant that would work with us to be able to do that, and then we would be able to commence construction, build 76 units, and then folks that are living in Phase 1B and that were relocated would be able to move back into Phase 1A, and it would allow us to, in the meantime, we would also be applying for Phase 1B resources, so that way, hopefully, when the timing lines up and we were able to get that project funded, we would then be able to, commence construction on the Phase 1B area. And then again, this is what the Phase 1B would entail. It would have 60 one-bedroom units over here with some amenity space, the community garden, etc. So this is the 1A and 1B is what we were recently permitted for with the town. And then in total, once 1A and 1B were built, the entire site would have 136 units, as opposed to the the 72 units that are there now. So it'd be adding affordability to the community, as well as replacing some tired existing public housing. And with that, I'll turn it over to Betsy, and she can walk you through some of our financing strategy here.
Good morning. Mindful of time and want to make sure you have time for questions. We'll try to get through this quickly. As Mike said, the plan is to submit for funding and approvals for Phase 1A, the first part of the project. The state has only one fixed public funding round a year, you have to do a pre-app in November, and if they determine you are demonstrating enough readiness to proceed, they then invite you in for a February round. So it was really great that we were able to get the special permit, Concom, and some of the other awards that were worked on with the Cambridge Housing Authority and with Reg and his board prior to the November date. We are asking for, we're taking an approach as Matt mentioned, the resources are very competitive, and so we have decided to try to do this project not with tax exempt bonds. So we are requesting what's called 9% credits. It's appropriately sized for this type of deal. We had some conversations with the state, and they felt it was a path that would perhaps get us through funding quicker, and they supported our kind of change in plan. So we're asking for $9.4 million of what we call soft debt. It is a number of programs that are not, they are basically cash flow loans. So 9.4 of that in the pre-app, and then also another $18 million of tax credit, tax credits, which will raise equity from investors. It's roughly a $10 million federal tax credit that's spread out over 10 years, and then also a state credit. So the total of that is 18. So as you can see, 27 some odd $1 million of the project is a request of the state in this funding round. So we're proceeding very quickly to try to make our project even more ready to proceed and demonstrate if we are invited in that, we have a good cost estimate. We will have documents advanced next week to a 70% construction document level. The general contractor and the architect have been working together, so the set of documents will be good. There'll be subcontractors will be asked to do what's called kind of a test bid, so that the number that we are putting in our application in February will be really well defined. There will still be some more evolution as we're only at 70%, but we'll have to get feedback from the state if they do fund us, and then also prepare it for a real bid optimally at the end of 25, and we'll talk about the time frame. The other key points of this, just to point out, we have penciled in a $14 million loan from Mass Housing Partnership. They are a quasi that lends debt. They work in conjunction with a construction lender, so it's kind of a two-step process. We'll borrow $30 million from a private bank, and then convert to a $14 million permanent loan. That's a 35-year amortization, but then a 20-year payoff. So it gives us very good rates, but it also matches up with some of the subsidy commitments we'll have. The rest of the resources that are identified include the construction financing from the CPC, some of the pre-development funds, the funds that were in the housing bond bill. We put in the 3.3 from the earmark funds, but there still is additional resources, which we may try to save for phase 1B. But what we've come up with is a full budget of about $55 million for phase 1A. There are extra costs associated with this. It won't be a $55 million 1B, because a lot of the infrastructure and certainly all the utilities and other things will be built into the project in phase 1A. If you want to go to the next slide, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Betsy, I'm sorry. Can I just stop you there? Because looking at, can you go back to that slide? Does this slide reflect the Faircloth and the other stuff, assuming that
Does. Yep.
Okay.
So
where is that?
So that is in an unit mix. Right now, we are assuming 38 Faircloth units will be used in phase 1A, and 20 Section 8 units will be provided in our application from the state. So that gives us 58 of the 76 units are going to have a subsidy attached. The Faircloth at 38, we're trying to be, it also might work if the Seabed Cooks project is phased, that we're not carrying all 68 in the first phase. There are 18 additional units that in the app to the state will be at 60%, but we're also trying to identify project-based subsidies so that the whole project would be project-based and enable the deep affordability. So what that really means is the permanent debt is dependent upon those subsidies. So that $14 million is 100% predicated on some level of Faircloth and 20 units of the state giving us Section 8. So we have 58 units that are project-based.
Kathy, there's a whole slide or slides on the 20-year operating expenses and revenues that we cut out in the interest of time, but we can.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to understand what the contingency plan is. You know what I mean? Because this is not assured, right? And then I guess the other thing is just back to your timeline. You guys all are aware that we're out of compliance right now with the MBTA Communities Act. And the soonest that we could be in compliance is January 14th, if the voters affirm what town meeting did. Otherwise, it will be late February. And I noticed late February is the time that the state invites us. So what are your thoughts on that? Like if the vote, yeah.
Can suggest we got 2 more slides to get through, and
okay,
then
that's fine.
the answer
Yeah,
is
I just was
like tomorrow.
noticing the timeline there, but yeah, go ahead. And
Yeah.
you can just answer that later.
Our timeline is definitely based upon best case scenario here, and then we can talk about worst case scenario in a minute. Betsy, do you want to go back to this one or?
Sure. And I won't go through every line item. So again, this is the one-time only funding round. We do anticipate, because they've done it in the past, and with the bond bill and other proceeds should become available later this year. This is the timeline if this project were to follow and get funded and approved, and all of the requests were awarded to us. They'd make an award sometime in the summer. We're saying July. And then we would have about 6 months to do the full bid and to try to get the attention of the state and their resources to get to a closing really in like April of 26. And that's all the kind of big picture, typical timeline of a very unusual situation if we were funded the first time in. We really pushed hard to get into the November pre-app so that we could get the attention of the state and get the attention that this project exists and where it was. But also we feel that, like they have in the past few years, they may have a mini round for projects that were in the round but didn't get funded. You can't walk into a mini round. You have to have been in and not funded. So we are really hopeful that even if we can't get funding in the first ask, that we would be invited in a mini round where there'll be additional resources available. So it's kind of one of those things where you really want to get the people's attention. I know there's been some communication with the state, particularly Housing and Livable Communities and the community and different resources to tell them about this project, and we've gotten them excited about it. The resources that the town has committed really is phenomenal between that and the Metro West home funds, the ARPA funds, the earmark funds. All of those really demonstrate the commitment of the community to the project, and that's something that the state weighs heavily when they consider a project coming in for funding. So again, this is a best case. It's really unlikely that we would be funded, and some of the things you just raised are variables, but it also could keep our seat at the table if they have a mini round to give us a little more time to answer. Should I dive into your question on the CPA? The state is aware of that the vote went through and that there's appeal pending. They may still allow, if that decision is, the 27th of February comes around, they still may allow projects that have at least had a positive vote and an appeal, or they may allow the project to come in for review. They have not made a decision yet on a scenario like this, where the town originally approved it and then there's a subsequent appeal. So we're just going to keep them apprised. It's like certain things that you have even with your an appeal period, say on your special permit. as long as you keep them apprised and they're still in decision making, I think we can still expect that they'll want to review the application at the end of February. Couple of the other things that and the obviously the couple of things that we would like to raise is that we have assumed that the no pilot agreement that was part of the original warrant when the property was transferred to the housing authority is part of our underwriting assumptions. So that $14 million permanent loan assumes that there will be no real estate taxes. The estimate we have for construction, again, assumes no building permit fees. And then the other two items, I think we just will need by the end of February to have the grant agreement worked out so that we can submit. At the end of February, we will have to provide documentation for all the resources that have been committed to the project. So that's on the timeline to get that drafted and approved. And then just the cleanup of some of the title with the registry before the end of February.
And that's all we had that, we wanted to bring up, but we can talk about whatever else questions wise. I can stop sharing now if you want. Just pull it up.
Yeah, Peter, you had a question?
So my question really is a request, which is can you just forward to us the cash flow analysis?
Absolutely.
And then I don't know that I wouldn't ask you to do this because they're a whole different team, but we had reviewed sources and uses of funds in multiple iterations before you folks came along, and as well as a cash flow analysis. So maybe if we could just see the last one. I know it's dramatically different. You're not the same team. I don't want to ask anybody to do an analysis of the differences, but we just have the two of them in front of us. It would just
Sure.
help
I'll
us.
point out the two big differences that were right off the bat. Obviously, it's phasing. We are not assuming a tax exempt bond financing. We can give you bullets, but they're dramatically different because we're going into a different type of funding round with the state than was originally contemplated. And then also the NAR, which is the application that we filed by September 30th, that program sunset. So it gives us the benefit of being eligible for a higher rent standard for those Faircloth units. So that may be one of the other variables. So we're happy to, Reg can help us identify the last one you had, but we can share our source and use and the cash flow for the 76 units in the first phase.
I guess if you could put together the bullet points, I just
Happy
don't
to.
want to waste
No,
it.
yeah.
But if I
Yeah.
don't want to put more on your plate than you already have, but if that would just, I think it would
We'll
help.
just try to point out, and we'll laugh because no matter what you line them up, they won't look the same, but we will absolutely give you some of the points I just mentioned because, there are reasons why things look a little different.
So I'm mindful of time here, but I want to make sure that John and Erwin get their questions answered here. So John.
Sure, a quick question, then just a confirmation. Did I hear you, Betsy, that you've selected a general contractor, and if so, who is it? And
Sure. Part of our response as part of the procurement of our team included the general contractor and the relocation specialist. So the procurement from the housing authority was also our response, then identified NEI General Contracting. They're a Massachusetts-based firm, do a tremendous amount of affordable housing development, and allow us, from our experience, we've always taken the approach that if we have a general contractor on board up front, we get an awful lot of coordination and value engineering. They will provide the detail for their subcontracts. That's how the state gets comfortable that the price is competitive. But so as part of our response, the housing authority has selected us, the general contractor, and the relocation specialist.
And thank you for that. And then just a confirmation, the 5.5 CPA funds, our Needham funds, though none of those are going to be expended until the whole
So we
project
break ground and have all of our approvals in place, the building permit in hand, and they'll be part of a schedule of funds that will flow in. We have to do a over the period of construction, we have to do a schedule that will show what we anticipate the what each month's draw will be, and then we can identify that and provide that when we're at the good point of trying to get going with construction.
Thank you.
Erwin?
I will send my question to Katie in an email since it's 9 o'clock now. If that's preferable. Or I
Okay.
could ask it. It's up to you.
Just ask it. Just go ahead.
Okay. I was curious if there's some the 5% contingency, if you have some data sort of retrospectively looking at comparable projects, is that consistent with a 5% construction contingency?
Yeah, we are required by all the lenders in this side of the industry to do a 5%. It is consistent. We try to mitigate a lot of the guesswork on new construction. Site improvements are the biggest one. We can quantify all the environmental concerns and the other parts of demolition. If a rehab is 10%, typically, just because you have a lot more unknowns. But we've already started to characterize soils for structural analysis, environmental concerns on even whether or not we have to do different for fill and things like that. So 5% is consistently what we find, and we sometimes are able to then have a few wish list items if we don't need the full 5%, improvements that we would like to make, because we will want to try to maximize the commitment from the state and the other resources.
Thank you.
John, did you have one last question, or is that just
I'm
an
sorry.
old
No, I
hand?
apologize. No.
No problem. Okay, so in that case, we're at 9:02. So we did say hard stop, so I'd welcome a motion to adjourn.
So
Sure.
There was a second somewhere.
I get the second.
Okay, all right. So we'll have a vote. John,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Rhonda. I didn't hear you, Rhonda. Oh, voice is shot. Oh, and Newton, Avery says yes. Rick,
Yes.
Erwin,
yes.
Denise,
Yes.
and the chair says yes. So we are adjourned. So Katie will send out a schedule request, but we can plan on meeting in January and February. Happy holidays to everyone.
You too.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.